Welcome to the Beau Show. Last week, Joe Biden made a particularly unique speech from Constitution Hall in Philadelphia. And today I want to break down that speech for you and analyze its text. Because I haven't seen a speech quite like this before, especially from Biden. So I want to look into its causes and what its intended effects are as well. So first, let's set the scene. Here comes Biden to the stage. I believe they may have piped in crowd noise and applause because no one really cheers for this guy. You know, game shows famously have a sign that indicates to the audience when to applaud, so let's watch this opening just one more time with a more likely way that they executed this. Now watch this transition to a blood-red lighting.
My fellow Americans, please, if you have a seat, take it.
First of all, Biden is off to a bad start with a frog in his throat. Not a great way to kick things off. But this lighting is interesting. Some, such as Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, compared this backdrop and imagery to Nazi Germany and Adolf Hitler. According to Newsweek, Nazi symbolism came to be exemplified by the party's Nuremberg rallies held in the 1920s and 1930s. In 1938, for example, Hitler addressed thousands of party supporters in the specially built site festooned with swastikas. He described Jews in Germany as parasites and criticized democracies as dishonest. A year later, the Nazis invaded Poland to start the Second World War, intensifying the oppression of minority groups in Germany and occupied countries that culminated in the Holocaust. This is a great example, though, of how television can create a certain visual. And I don't know who on Biden's team thought this was a good idea, but in trying to make Biden look tough, it went overboard, and not in a good way. Even Joe Rogan posted, quote, "Imagine thinking this was a good idea," unquote. This was a bad move. So off to a terrible start with hints of the Third Reich. Let's continue.
I speak to you tonight from sacred ground in America.
Seems Biden can't get rid of that COVID cough. But tennis player Novak Djokovic, who does not have a cough, cannot play in this week's U.S. Open tournament. More doublespeak science.
I've come to this place where it all began to speak as plainly as I can to the nation.
Plainly as you can? Good luck, Joe.
Too much of what's happening in our country today is not normal. Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. Now, I want to be very clear up front.
Okay, so let's pause here. Biden is saying that Trump MAGA Republicans are a threat to the United States. That's bold. And it's also taking aim at essentially half of the country. But then he puts this caveat on it.
Not every Republican, not even the majority of Republicans are MAGA Republicans. Not every Republican embraces their extreme ideology. I know, because I've been able to work with these mainstream Republicans.
So he's trying to differentiate Republicans here. Trump versus the swampers, or even what you might call establishment never-Trumpers. Some of these folks that he's talking about created the Lincoln Project. Not every Republican has to support Donald Trump, nor does every MAGA Trumper have to support the Republican Party. But what Trump did in 2016 was to both defeat the typical GOP politicians and at the same time unite them to defeat Hillary Clinton. That cannot be overstated. Trump in many ways had to defeat the party and break it up before he could unite it. They said he'd be a warmonger, and he put America in no wars. They said he was crass, and yet he brought faith to the fore again. So Joe continues with his Bidenist Manifesto.
MAGA Republicans do not respect the Constitution. They do not believe in the rule of law. They do not recognize the will of the people. They refuse to accept the results of a free election. And they're working right now, as I speak, in state after state, to give power to decide elections in America to partisans and cronies, empowering election deniers to undermine democracy itself.
Everything he just said is false. All of this election integrity that has been passed in states like Georgia and Florida and Arizona have been simply measures such as voter ID, reducing haphazard absentee ballots, and things that could create fraud. This is not cronyism. This is common sense. So just in the first 5 minutes of this speech, Biden has already spun the yarn. Then he goes on to say this.
MAGA forces are determined to take this country backwards to an America where there is no right to choose.
This reminded me of a speech Biden gave before.
Look at what they value and look at their budget and what they're proposing. Romney wants to he said in the first 100 days, he's going to let the big banks once again write their own rules. Unchain.
Sound familiar? And then he went on to say this.
There are far more Americans from every background and belief who reject the extreme MAGA ideology than those that accept it. And folks, it's within our power, it's in our hands, yours and mine, to stop the assault on American democracy.
And here's another gem.
MAGA Republicans have made their choice. They embrace anger. They thrive on chaos. They live not in the light of truth, but in the shadow of lies.
Shadow of lies? Joe, you lied to the American people when you said that you had no idea about your son's business deals in China and Ukraine. This was revealed on your son's laptop that independent forensics confirmed, and now the FBI has as well. And as far as anger is concerned, what do you call your supporters who showed up at Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh's house to intimidate and threaten him and his family?
This is a nation that believes in the rule of law. We do not repudiate it. This is a nation that respects free and fair elections. We honor the will of the people. We do not deny it.
Rule of law? Is that what you call not pressing charges against BLM rioters who burned buildings down? Is that what you call the spike in crime that we have seen ever since Biden took office? Cities and streets in our country are not safe. And as far as the will of the people goes in free and fair elections, how can he say that with a straight face when Dinesh D'Souza caught 2,000 people committing felonies by dropping multiple ballots in drop boxes in the middle of the night, confirmed by video evidence? How is that a free and fair election? How is it free and fair if the FBI tells social media companies to suppress a story about the president's son that would have clearly changed millions of votes? Here's some more hypocrisy.
There are public figures today, yesterday, and the day before predicting and all but calling for mass violence and rioting in the streets. This is inflammatory. It's dangerous. It's against the rule of law.
Now I have to pause here because he's talking about elected officials calling for violence. Here are a few officials doing just that.
If we can't protect the children, we can't protect anybody. If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome. The people are going to turn on them. They're going to protest. They're going to absolutely harass them until they decide that they're going to tell the president, no, I can't hang with you.
Not in D.C. Not in the U.S. Not in D.C. Not in the U.S. Not in D.C.
and another one.
Congresswoman, what happens if we do not get what you just told? What should the people do? What should protesters on the street do?
I didn't hear you.
What happens?
What should protesters do?
Well, we got to stay on the street, and we've got to get more active. We've got to get more confrontational. We've got to make sure that they know that we mean.
No, that's not a MAGA Republican right there. That is Maxine Waters, a Democrat congresswoman from California. So what on earth is old Joe talking about? Speaking of speaking, Joe has trouble with a word here.
We can't be pro-insurrectionist.
Insurrectionist. I don't think it's that hard to say. Then Biden goes on a tirade again about the election.
I will not stand by and watch. I will not, the will of the American people, be overturned by wild conspiracy theories and baseless evidence-free claims of fraud. I will not stand by and watch elections in this country stolen by people who simply refuse to accept that they lost.
Someone who is this angry, and these days it's the only emotion I see coming from Joe Biden, looks like a guy who just thinks if he repeats the same lie with the same conviction, that you'll believe it. He talks about baseless conspiracy theories, but yet he refuses to acknowledge his son's laptop and the cover-up. He refuses to acknowledge the lie of Russian collusion that took 2 years of investigation. How can this man with a straight face tell you that people refuse to admit they lost when these conspiracy theories are no longer theories? They've come true. The Steele dossier was fake, but the laptop was real. Let's continue.
I believe we could lift America from the depths of COVID. So we passed the largest economic recovery package since Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And today, America's economy is faster, stronger than any other advanced nation in the world. We have more to go. I believe we could build a better America. So we passed the biggest infrastructure investment since President Dwight D. Eisenhower. And we've now embarked on a decade of rebuilding the nation's roads, bridges, highways, ports, water systems, high-speed internet, railroads. I believe we could make America safer. So we passed the most significant gun safety law since President Clinton. I believe we could go from being the highest cost of prescriptions in the world to making prescription drugs and healthcare more affordable. So we passed the most significant healthcare reform since President Obama signed the Affordable Care Act.
That largest what package? And what is he smoking? We are in a recession and inflation is at a high. Have you checked the price of goods lately?
And I believe we could create a clean energy future and save the planet. So we passed the most important climate initiative ever. Ever. Wow. It's a long time. The best climate bill ever. But today, COVID no longer controls our lives. More Americans are working than ever. Businesses are growing. Our schools are open. Millions of Americans have been lifted out of poverty. COVID no longer controls our lives? Totally disagree. People still wear 2 masks outside. And you have a policy that prevents Novak Djokovic from playing in the US Open. And by the way, can you hear what's going on in the background? Schools are open. Millions of Americans have been lifted out of poverty. Did you hear that? Let's go, Brandon. That's a reference to a clip in which a NASCAR reporter mistook the crowd yelling, F Joe Biden, rather than let's go, Brandon. And check this out. And that democracy must be defended, for democracy makes all these things possible. Folks, I like how a police siren goes off towards the end of that clip, likely meaning someone has been shot in Philly. Just as Biden talks about his awful crime bill and how the only violent people are MAGA Republicans, he drones on. Courage that digs deep when we need it. Empathy that fuels democracy. The willingness to see each other not as enemies but as fellow Americans. Look, our democracy isn't perfect. It always has been. notwithstanding those folks you hear on the other side there. They're entitled to be outrageous. This is a democracy.
Did you hear it again? Another Let's Go Brandon. And another police siren. Yep, another Philly crime. It's funny to me how he keeps talking up democracy when he's standing up there like a dictator. As he winds up, he fumbles again.
We preserve democracy. We heeded our worst. We heeded not our worst instincts, but our better angels. We proved that for all its imperfections, America is still the beacon to the world.
And at the very end,
God bless you all. Democracy. Thank you.
looks right, looks left, looks back right again. Ah, yes, there's Dr. Jill. Oh, but one more thing. What was he trying to say in the microphone? Thank you to Pfizer for sponsoring the speech. I need some warm milk. What on earth was he trying to add? Honestly, Jill Biden looks like she's leading Joe out to pasture or back to the old folks' home. And then let's watch this exit. Oh, watch that step there, Joe. Okay, so now thank God it's over. We can stop the bleeding. That was 25 minutes of misery that I will never get back. So now let's review some things. One, you can't overlook that red Führer light behind him. The irony of him talking about democracy in this setting was priceless. Someone on Biden's staff is to be commended with having even more dementia than Biden himself. Democrats have got to start being honest. See, Biden vilified half the country in an attempt to divide Republicans because he knows it's the only way he could win, or his party can win. But in the process, he acts like his party is unified because he's bullying Democrats in this way. But if you're a Democrat and you don't see a Third Reich-style speech coming from him from Philly, you need a wake-up call. People that aren't even political, like Dave Portnoy of Barstool Sports and Joe Rogan, who is certainly not affiliated with the GOP, are looking at this speech and seeing what any honest person would. The clench-fisted Biden looked and sounded like a dictator, especially as he vilified 70 million people as enemies. Did Hitler not do the very same thing? How can this man call himself a uniter and a president of red and blue states when he just pilloried half the country? It's dishonest. And truly, I think this was one of the most, if not the most disgraceful presidential speeches in American history. Not just for the imagery that it conjured up, but the content of the speech, the vitriol, the anger. Not once did he smile. He looked like an old man full of hate. And he's only reading what people like Susan Rice and others are putting into his teleprompter. When giving a speech, you cannot be one-dimensional. You have to be dynamic. He didn't seem like a president for everyone. He came across as an angry old man who needs help off the stage. This is what the Democrat Party has devolved into. And that's what I want you to pay attention to, the psychological warfare here. Dems' only hope of winning in 2022 and 2024 is to fracture the GOP. They don't have support in numbers because the results of bad policy have come to fruition. So in using this dictatorial style, Biden has become a demagogue of sorts. But the way the great Oz was in The Wizard of Oz, someone is behind that red set pulling the strings. He's trying to get those establishment anti-Trump Republicans to vote against MAGA candidates. But I want you to see the contrast between Biden and Trump. Donald Trump responded to the Biden speech at a rally in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. Take a look.
As you know, this week, Joe Biden came to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania to give the most vicious, hateful, and divisive speech ever delivered by an American president, vilifying 75 million citizens plus another probably 75 to 150, if we want to be accurate about it, as threats to democracy and as enemies of the state. You're all enemies of the state. He's an enemy of the state. You want to know the truth? The enemy of the state is him and the group that control him, which is circling around him. Do this, do that, Joe. You're going to do this, Joe, right? I think Philadelphia was a great choice to make this speech of hatred and anger. His speech was hatred and anger. By the way, the next morning he forgot what he said. You saw that. They asked him about, oh, I didn't think I said that, did I? Oh, no. How'd you like the red lighting behind him like the devil? But Philadelphia was a great choice because the city is being devastated under Democrat rule. Devastated. Hate to tell you, we love Pennsylvania. I went to school in Philadelphia. What's happening to Philadelphia? 14 people were shot last weekend in Philadelphia, 14. And the fake news will go out and check. Oh, that's a lot of fake news. Whoa. That's a lot of fake news.
So Trump does two things. He brings truth with some acerbic wit. Accurately, he talks about the crime in Pennsylvania. He talks about Democrat policies and what they do to cities. And then, of course, he brings a healthy dose of humor. And it's true what he said. Biden brought nothing but vicious hate in that speech. It was an embarrassment. Independents will see this speech and likely be mortified. He looks unhinged, if not demented. But there Trump is with the same level of energy and humor that he always has, and calling out what has to be called out: the crime, the inflation, the border situation. And once again, sharp as a tack, Trump shows up in Pennsylvania, the very state where Biden delivered his speech, to best him. It's like he's always one step ahead of the game. To that point, do you remember this during the 2020 debates?
Yeah, but because what he did, even before COVID, manufacturing went in the hole. Manufacturing went in the hole.
Excuse
number
me,
one.
Chris. Wait.
Number two.
Chris.
Number three.
They said it would take... No, you were number two.
No.
Chris, they said...
It was hard to find this exact clip because YouTube doesn't want people discovering this mental mishap by Biden. You can see the look on Biden's face when he realizes his error. And now let's look at how Biden backtracked. So he demonizes half the country as enemies in his speech. And then the very next day, he said this.
Come on, look, guys. You keep trying to make that case. I don't consider any Trump supporter to be a threat to the country. I do think anyone who calls for the use of violence, fails to condemn violence when it's used, refuses to acknowledge when an election has been won, insists upon changing the way in which the rules you count votes. That is a threat to democracy. Democracy. And everything we stand for rests on the platform of democracy. When people voted for Donald Trump and support him now, they weren't voting for attacking the Capitol. They weren't voting for overruling an election. They were voting for a philosophy he put forward. So I am not talking about anything other than it is inappropriate, and it's not only happening here, but other parts of the world where there's a failure to recognize and condemn violence whenever it's used for political purposes, failure to condemn the attempt to manipulate electoral outcomes, failure to acknowledge when elections were won or lost.
He says to the reporter, "You guys keep trying to make that case." No. Biden said these very words just 24 hours prior to this press conference. So Now he says Trump supporters are not a domestic enemy? But let's look at what he tweeted on September 1st. Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans are a threat to the very soul of this country. How else can that be interpreted? And 31,000 people retweeted that. 170,000 people liked it. So with some simple math, that means that about 0.0006% of the population thinks Biden's statement is accurate. Now, that's not a lot, but it does speak to the 0.0006% of Americans that have lost their minds. And I think that's a fair assessment. But if you're part of the majority who doesn't think that, you are the sane majority, but a silent majority. This is what I mean when I say that sensible Democrats have to start speaking up. I can tell you right now that the pulse of independence is not leaning Democrat. The results, nor the actual personalities, are wooing them. They know that a Republican takeover in the House and the Senate in November means an immediate boost to the stock market and to the economy. So let's go back and go 30,000 feet. Biden did this bizarre speech for one reason alone: politics. He says it's a soul of the nation speech. But what is the soul of the nation? Is it inflationist? Socialist? Climate changeist? He's going for very unpopular things. And he's seeing that Trump has the energy again. He's out there doing rallies while Biden has to stage this speech in Philly, where the crime stats don't work to his advantage. The politics just aren't expedient. So what Biden does comes from a pure emotional standpoint. Paint your opponent to be evil, to be an enemy of democracy. Hope that it fractures his supporters. That's all he's got. He's tried this lately with student loan forgiveness, and now it's an appeal to emotion. But if you look at the sheer optics, one is a guy who was out there having fun and making jokes, and the other is someone reading a teleprompter and has to be helped down the stairs by his wife. Kind of makes you think of that whole Nixon-Kennedy debate. But the difference is that neither Nixon nor Kennedy gave themselves this commie red backdrop with military figures in the background. You know, you can hate Trump all you want to, but you cannot support the staging of this Biden speech. It's demented. Biden is not the uniter, he's the divider. He's appealing to fear and anger and emotion, not to logic and reason. He's not even reading his own words. See, Trump speaks off the cuff from his own instinct. Biden reads from a prepared script, which also makes you wonder, who is writing this and what do they have in mind? If they are appealing to the soul of America, what kind of a soul is that demonizes half the country? Why choose a Nazi-style set? Why allow the man to stand there and pound his fists? Do you have any idea what goes into the preparation for a speech like this? But then again, I mean, look at the subject matter that they are working with. I've been in the entertainment business most of my life, and you can only do so much with what you're given. But what you don't do is give the opposition an upper hand. You don't give them fodder. You know, even when George W. Bush was on that aircraft carrier with a misguided mission accomplished sign, at least it looked patriotic and victorious. Blood red lighting and angry rhetoric gives Donald Trump ample material to pounce upon, and he did. This is not going to win you independence. It will win you about 3 Republicans whose name rhymes with Aney. To put on a production of this sort, it requires mass planning, especially for a president that does not have it all together. Biden has a staff that is just about as feeble as he is, and that doesn't help him out at all. I don't think his staff understands how it comes across, how it plays. And as Ricky Roma says in the movie Glengarry, Glen Ross,
you want to learn the first rule you'd know if you ever spent a day in your life. You never open your mouth till you know what the shot is.
You never open your mouth till you know what the shot is. Now here Roma, played by Al Pacino, is mad that Williamson, played by Kevin Spacey, has opened his mouth and ruined his sale. So the point is, know your audience, read the room, and don't blow it. And folks, Biden just blew it. He told you what his manifesto is, and now you can take it and do what you will with it. I'm Beau, and that's the show.